hard stop coming up around 4:05 or so. So I'm going to introduce Dave McClintock from University of Chicago, same place as Paul Chang came from, and they kind of work together. You'll probably see some of the things that are very similar between two slides, but he's a pathologist, so he knows better. Okay.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, my name is Dave McClintock, and I'm the new, took over for Paul as Director of Pathology Informatics down at the University of Chicago. And so today I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the workflow changes that we have started to look at, and especially how they relate to the AP labs as you look at whole slide imaging. So first off, I unfortunately have nothing to disclose. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of talk about whole slide imaging a little bit, and specifically I'm talking about the idea of full adoption. This talk is going to be mainly just focused on the idea of what do we need to do to have full adoption of whole slide imaging in the future. And my main first tenet is that I think we can almost say that whole slide imaging has advanced to the point that full adoption may be conceivable for routine clinical use. And by full adoption, what I really mean is that we are scanning every single slide created by the histology laboratory. Now I am ignoring heme path right now, and I'm somewhat ignoring cytology. I'm basically talking about tissue sections. So full adoption of tissue section pathology. We're including all H&E, special stains, IHC stains here, and we're assuming that viewing of virtual slides only. So again, no microscopes. We're doing everything on the computer at our workstations. So why do I think that this could be conceivable? Well, if you take a look at the technological advances right now, whole slide imaging robots, I call them that right now, mainly because when you think of it, I want to think of this as a robot that you put in the workflow, okay? I don't want to think of it as, so you can, we also call them virtual slide scanners, but the way I want to think of it is as an actual robot in the workflow. These things right now, you can now get scanning speeds as low as 1 minute per slide if you believe the vendors at 40x. And in fact, looking at it, there's probably a range of 1 to 5 minutes per slide. But the main point is that 4 or 5 years ago, it was 15 to 20 minutes per 40x on F40x for one slide. And now we're at about a minute. So it's gotten much, much better. So we have very, very fast scan speeds right now. They're being designed for clinical use, which is a very important part. How are they being designed? They have one button operation. The whole idea is that you load them and you walk away. There's automatic tissue, and they all have automatic tissue detection right now. Some of the newest clinical ones where, again, they're going to do everything for you. They're going to detect the tissue. They're going to do everything that you want. More importantly, there's continuous scanning. So you can think about this now in terms of you can unload and load the slides without disrupting the scanning process. If you equate this to clinical chemistry, if you had to stop your automatic line every time you had to load a new specimen, you would never have an automatic line. So for us, this is a very important achievement that you can actually load more slides on the scanner without having to actually stop the scanner, recalibrate, do anything like that. It all does it continuously. And positive patient identification has been thought about and integrated in these things. So you can actually finally positively ID each slide, and they can actually match it to the patient record with appropriate interfacing. Okay, and these will all allow us to do automated case assembly. So right now, this is all possible with the right integration, with the right software, with the right scanners at this point in time. So this is actually a huge advances from 4 or 5 years ago. If you take a look at the technology of today for all the rest of the stuff, for our workstations, where we're actually going to view the slides, they're much faster now. Multi-core processing, increased RAM, solid-state drives. I just got one of the latest MacBook Pros. They're really fast. I can't believe how fast they are now compared to what they had in the past. There's a lot more storage. Terabyte drives are the norm for all these things. You can really easily get a decked out computer workstation now for your office that isn't that costly. They all have gigabit Ethernet, faster, better graphics, so you can see that we're not going to be limited now at the computer workstation side as we were maybe 5 years ago. Servers have had the same benefits for the past decade. They're all bigger, faster, stronger. We can do a lot more. And then the displays, for us, size matters to a pathologist. They really care that they want a bigger display. I have a 30-inch display in my office right now. When everybody comes in and sees it, they all joke about how they're going to steal it from me because they all want bigger displays. 22 to 24-inch displays are the new norm. All computers come with these sizes. Dual displays. Basically, all our pathologists, except for 1 or 2, for their own weird reasons, have dual displays. And of course, we all know the benefits of LCDs. But the nice thing is that you have medical-grade displays now available for pathology, so that you can use, you can get up to 6 to 10 megapixels if you really want it, resolution on these displays, DICOM calibrated. So, in general, are we ready? From the technology that I just described to you, do you think that if my chairman gave me a completely blank check and said, hey, go do this right now, Could we do it? I think from a technology-wise perspective, the answer is yes. I could go out there, and if I had enough money, I could find the right vendor and start spending it. However, of course, the question that we have to come up with is, how's it going to affect our workflow? How is it actually going to, if I start doing this, what's going to happen to us in the labs themselves if I start putting these machines in? So quickly, just so you guys know where I'm coming from the idea of workflow, I want to define it. Everybody's been talking about workflow all the time at this conference, but I really haven't seen many definitions of it, so I wanted to just make sure people understood where I'm coming from. Workflow itself is a depiction of a sequence of operations, and this is all from Wikipedia, so that's kind of where I figured some people were using Oxford, Merriam-Webster's. I like Wikipedia. It's a model to represent real work for further assessment. So really, if you take a look at it, this is a very high-level workflow from anatomic pathology, okay? This basically, this workflow from accessioning down to case post-processing and archival, it's all the same for either autopsy, setup pathology, surgical pathology, that kind of thing. You can document workflow with processes. So workflows, if you think of it as a more general concept, processes themselves are much more specific, and that's what processes, in a sense, can make up workflow. So a process itself has a well-defined input, output, and purpose. And I think if you're looking at any type of process in your lab, if you can't figure out what the well-defined input, output, or purpose is, either it's not a process or you have a really broken process. And the important point here, too, is that a process is what we do in order to develop a product or deliver a service. In our labs, we are developing a product and we're delivering a service, and that's really important to remember. And every area in pathology is a workflow that can be documented. So again, here's our surgical pathology workflow, updated from what you saw earlier a little bit. But again, it works the same thing, specimen receipt all the way through to report transmission and case archival. This can get a lot more complicated. So here's a workflow diagram from our grocery room up in somewhere in the East Coast, in the Boston area. And here's all the decisions that need to be made along this workflow. Here are all the sub-processes that can be described. This thing can be very, very complicated. Luckily, our labs also have some not so complicated workflows. So here's histology. It looks somewhat linear. You can actually follow the things much better than you can for the grocery room. That gives us some hope that we actually can describe these pretty well. The main point about this, though, is that if you start documenting and doing all your workflow, and you start documenting your workflow, you understand the processes, you can start doing business process modeling. And in fact, Paul mentioned a little bit of this in his talk just recently, but this is where you really want to create virtual representations of all the processes in your enterprise, all the processes in pathology. You want to start documenting it so you can optimize portions of it. In business, it's been used to optimize manufacturing, purchasing, marketing, sales, that kind of stuff. For us, if you think about pathology, our labs a lot of times are like a manufacturing process. We are manufacturing slides, we're manufacturing reports. If you think of it like that, we can use the same kind of software to analyze and describe what we're doing in our labs. What are the benefits of this? Well, you can leverage all the experience of the business and manufacturing areas and apply it to our labs. You know, there are basic transactions in manufacturing. Can be our specimens, our blocks, our slides. The resources that we have, our employees, our instruments, our interfaces. We can compare times, we can compare resource efficiencies, we can compare costs. We can do all these things with this kind of analysis. And the whole point is that we want to generate data upon which to actually make educated decisions. You know, and you can use this by doing computerized simulations. So how would you design a simulation project for, say, histology? First, you got to collect your process step data from all your work areas. Unfortunately for us, I think as many of you know, it's really hard to find good data. We would love to be able to just go into our barcoding tracking system in our LIS and look over the last 5 years and find all our data. Most of us also know this is almost impossible to do. You really don't know where to find the data in the LIS a lot of times. It's hard to get the data out. And in some ways, it's also hard to get people to actually barcode every place that you want to get data from. So that leads you to the next best step, which is observation data. So you can start looking at how people do their work. You can actually watch them in the labs. And I've done this, and I've seen, though, unfortunately, that when you do this, sometimes you get good data, and sometimes people work a little faster, they work a little slower, they start asking more questions, and they basically change the way that they work just because they're being observed. And so in the end, you end up using a combination of what would be best estimate data, asking people what happens, how long does this take, what are you using this for, along with observation data and any data that you might be able to get out of your LIS. But the whole point is that once you get your data, you can then create your computer-assisted process model, and you can really see this, but you want to plug in into there and run a simulation that allows you to actually start testing some of your theories. So I wanted to apply this to whole slide imaging and full adoption, and I wanted to do a simulation. To do this, you have to create your baseline histology model, which we did. And so once you create your baseline histology model, you can then start plugging in things. And so for me, I want to start plugging in instruments. So I want to plug in the whole slide imaging robot and figure out how is it going to affect the way that I do my work in the lab. And for this, you have to have a purpose. So we have to have an input, an output, and a purpose. Our main input for this is going to be blocks because we're doing it for histology. Our main output is going to be slides, and slides going to the pathologist. And our purpose is going to be to look at what is the total simulation runtime, or in essence, how long does it take to finish the day's work, or when will the pathologist get their slides? The most important part. Pathologists are doing the work. They want to know when they're going to get their slides. Okay. So I'm going to start off with 2 labs to show you some data from both of those. The first is Mass General, where I did my fellowship. We were able to describe and get some data from there. They're a high-volume lab. They do about 80,000 cases per year. They do about 1,200 to 1,400 routine blocks per day, and about 2,500 to 3,000 routine slides that they produce each day. Here's an example of their process model. So at the top here, each of these is a different step. You have the different areas, the embedding room, microtomy, case organization. Each of these steps describes an action that's being done, such as you're embedding specimens, you're creating slides, you're drying them in the oven, you're staining them, that kind of thing. Up here we have, this is where transactions enter the model, so this is where we generate our blocks. Our blocks actually come off of processor runs. So at this point we have a certain number of blocks that come in. We said that we had 1,200 total coming into the model. We have a certain number coming in at 2:30, certain number coming in at 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m., 6 a.m. There's 4 large batches that come in through the whole thing, and then in the end we have our slides coming out. Okay. Because the numbers were played out nicely, we basically decided for our model to just duplicate the slides throughout. So you can create a nice algorithm if you have all the data in terms of how many slides you create per block, if you can get that data. Or for us, we just estimate at this point in time. We can get fancier as we go on. At this point, then, I can also take my baseline model and I can add in a whole slide imaging robot at the appropriate spot where we would actually scan the slides in the lab. And then I can start doing some testing. Same thing for the University of Chicago, a little bit smaller lab. They do about 40% of the volume of MGH. Here's their model. It's a little different. Why? Because they're a different lab, different volumes, different things, different steps that they do. They're not MGH, as I like to say. So again, here we can go ahead and add a slide scanner and test to see what happens to the model. Again, we generate blocks for over 4 processor batches. It was lucky in the fact that both MGH and University of Chicago both use 4 processor batches throughout the day. I think both of them had 2:30s, 2:35, 5:30, and 6 a.m. They're basically the same times that they had their blocks come out. We generate 2 slides for each block, and we model this by using the actual resources from the lab. So we figured out how many microtomy techs do they have, how many stainers do they have, how many ovens, how many embedders do they have, all that sort of stuff we figured out for each lab. The one thing is that I defined the conditions by basically, I was a slave driver and didn't give the employees any breaks. All the staff were present. All the equipment was in perfect working order, and we did not do any rework. The reason for this is I wanted to see what happened to a perfect system. If I could assume a perfect system in histology, which I know it's not, but if I could assume that, I could actually see what would happen if I had a perfect system for whole slide imaging. What's the best case scenario? Obviously, when you start adding in anything like staff not being present, no breaks, if you start having employees go on break every 30, 40 minutes, or every 3-4 hours, the guy who takes a cigarette break every 30 minutes, that kind of stuff, if you add all that in, and then you also add in equipment that's down and everything else, you're going to have your model's going to make you're going to get more and more time. So what are the effects of this? Just to give you some orientation here. So by the way, everything that you see in this kind of teal, greenish, blue color is MGH. The University of Chicago colors are maroon and white, so that's what we're going to be using. Each of these lines gives you a range of scan time. So this is the time it takes to scan a slide. This is basically 1 to 3 minutes down to 2 to 4 minutes. I forgot why I actually put it in seconds instead. But so each of these is going to be a different time of scanning. What you have here on this line is the base model. So this is how long it takes when you run the simulation without a slide scanner. You get a baseline of 10.4 hours for Mass General. Now, obviously, people who are at Mass General know that you don't get your slides usually within 10 hours when things start. But this is an optimum situation. In fact, you do start getting some of your slides much earlier than this. This is an average of when you might get all your slides. This, on the other hand, is a column that shows you what happens when you add a single whole slide imager into the workflow. And this was alluded in a couple other talks too, where they kind of did a little thought experiment to see what would happen if you assumed this kind of time. When you run the model, you see that you actually get a 10-fold to up to 20-fold increase in the turnaround time of getting your slides out to your pathologist when you add a single whole slide imager into a high-volume laboratory. So the same thing with University of Chicago. Their baseline model is about 8 hours to get their slides out on a good day. And if you start adding in whole slide imaging, where you're averaging like anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes per slide, you're finding that it goes from anywhere from 40 to 63 hours to get the slides out, a 5 to 8-fold increase in time. So obviously we wouldn't just buy one scanner. Remember, I said my chairman gave me a blank check, so I want to buy more than one scanner. So how many scanners am I going to have to do it? For here, what I did here, we basically took the baseline model here at 0, and this is our number of whole slide imaging robots on the top, our histology turnaround time in hours on the bottom, and we just started, again, each of these represents a different scan time, and I just started plugging in multiple numbers of scanners. And I wanted to see what happens and how many scanners do I actually need. And so when you start doing this, again, here's our usual our number that we saw before, the 10-fold to 20-fold increase. As I start going down the line, I realized that for MGH, where everything starts to kind of level off and get back towards baseline, I would need anywhere from 9 to 15 scanners, depending upon the scan time, to actually enact, in the perfect optimum case, a full adoption of full slide imaging for routine slides. So what about University of Chicago? You would need, again, anywhere from 6 to 11 to get back to your baseline. So really what we're seeing here is that you would need a considerable amount of whole slide imagers. The vendors are now happy. I have to buy now anywhere from 6 to 11 at my institution just to get going. Now what about if I wanted to have the vendors, what if I went to the vendors and said, hey, I want you to make the scanner faster? The problem is that it's just not fast enough, okay? How fast would it have to be at each of these labs so I only have to buy one, and then obviously 2 to have one backup? So how fast would it have to be just to buy one scanner? If you look at the scan times on the top, so this is the scan time, this is the turnaround time for the histology laboratory, we find that you need to have scan times of anywhere from 12 to 14 seconds per slide. For MGH, you need to have scan times of 15 to 20 seconds per slide for University of Chicago. So that in itself, if I can get the vendors to do that, which I'm guessing is probably not going to be on the horizon for the next version of the scanner, we're going to have to obviously buy a lot more scanners than just one. So are we ready now? Technology-wise, I'd say yes again. You know, it's still possible from what I said from the beginning. Workflow-wise, no, we're not ready whatsoever. So I would say right now, full adoption is not feasible with today's workflows. You know, a single whole slide imaging robot will result in significant delays in getting your slides to the pathologist. I think that's a given right now. And I need to have a lot. I need to spend, you know, with my vendor discount, I'd probably spend at least, what, for MGH, $2 to $3 million, and with UC, anywhere from $1.5 to $2 million on scanners. And we're not talking infrastructure, we're not talking servers or anything else, just the equipment itself, just to get things started. Or, again, I think scan times of 12 to 20 seconds per slide right now is not even close to being feasible. And that's on a regular basis. We have 1 minute right now, but again, it's more like 2 to 3 minutes if you think about all the different types of tissue that you can put on a slide. So now what do we do? Well, I think you guys saw this, and this was alluded to in the last talk. How many of you guys were here for Paul's talk? I'm guessing most of you? Yeah. So he kind of beat me to the punch with this, but the main thing here is, you know, our surgical pathology workflow is based on batching. And we all know this. We all see it batches. And batching creates inherent bottlenecks in the system. One thing that he did say was that he thought it was the stainer, and actually no. I think the main problem here isn't the staining, it's the processing. And the main problem is that this is what creates our biggest bottleneck in the system. We have to wait an extra day, or we have to wait an extra 8 to 10 hours to process all of our cassettes, all right? So this is the big bottleneck in the system, is the processing. So how do we move away from large batches right now? I mean, that was the big thing when I saw my model. I had to wait for the 2:30 run, the 5 a.m. run, the 5:30 a.m. run, the 6 a.m. run. How do I move away from these big, large batches? One thing that we can do in the model is we can say, you know what? Let's just say that we could do smaller batches. How do we do this? Well, we can test it by changing the input of our histology model from this large batch to a continuous flow model, or the inline model, where instead of having the 4 large batches, we have a continuous flow of cassettes at a certain rate per hour. So this would be, you know, for us, if you take a look at, I'm going to use this University of Chicago to save us time. If we have 480 blocks, I could do it for 40 blocks an hour and have introduced cassettes into this model at 40 blocks an hour, and that would allow me to get through all my day's work, if you look at it, in a lot less time. And in fact, if you look at the baseline model here, our time has gone from 8 hours to by definition greater than 12 hours, because again, I'm introducing all my blocks 40 at a time per hour, so it has to be at least greater than 12 hours to get all my work done in my slides to the pathologist. So baseline is going to be about 13.3. Again, adding a single whole slide imager will create an additional bottleneck. But I only need now 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 whole slide imagers. Instead of having 6 to 11, I only need 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 right now to actually get the work done based on the scan times. And in fact, this is good news for me because I now have cut my budget in half for the number of images that I need realistically to start getting this work done. And that's just with a simple, one simple thing. If I start making a lot more workflow changes and make things more efficient, I might be able to cut that number down even more. And so I think what you can see here is that this allows you to have immense costs and space savings for the lab. However, this is where I want any of the whole slide imagers, the vendors and the audience to take a look at this, is the main problem we have is that while we have these advances in the whole slide imagers where they're looking at they're looking at the fact that you can continuously load your scanners, that's a good thing. You can load and unload without stopping the scanning process. If I was to purchase 5 of these, 6 of these right now, I would, based on whichever scanner I get, there's different ones out there, I'd be able to load anywhere from 600 to 1,500 slides at once, which means that I'd be able to load my entire day's work again at the beginning of the day, that kind of thing, because I have such a huge amount of slides that I could put in there. But in a continuous model, I only need to load maybe up to 100 at a time, probably more likely 20 to 30 at a time. So really, parallel scanning here is a much more important concept to do than large batch size for clinical use. So I'm going to pick on Philips because I have one of these scanners back in my place. But if I had to buy 4 of these, it takes up a lot of space. I now have 1,200 slides I can put in the scanner. I'd rather have something like this. This is not available for use. This is just my Photoshop. But I'd rather have something like this where I have a place to have 4 scanners going at once in parallel with a single place to load my slides. So now it allows me to batch. That allows me to, I don't have to worry about, I can do small batches, continuously load and unload as I go through, and it's doing 4 scans at once. It saves me space, it saves me power, it saves me connectivity, all that sort of stuff all at once. So if you guys can do that soon, that'd be really appreciated. Then I can get started. Yeah, if I could just cut and paste your scanner, it'd be perfect. I'll get a hacksaw tomorrow. So I think from this, what's my time? We want to get done in 7 minutes? Okay, I can finish in 7 minutes. So at this point, there obviously are going to be changes that are going to have to happen to the system, though. If I go to continuous flow, and Paul alluded to this a little bit in this talk, if I go to continuous flow, there's going to be obvious changes to the rest of the workflow. And this is going to have an effect on specimen acquisition, gross room, case distribution, and obviously the pathologist's case sign-out and review. I mean, with specimen acquisition and receipt, and again, he mentioned this too, I mean, the whole point here is that we have no control over when specimens show up in our gross room. So we need to have a better idea of when this happens in order for us, because batching really starts in the ORs and the clinics. You know, in some ways, it's hard for us to control when the ORs send us their specimens. I mean, even if we do know when they're coming, which would be a good thing, we can't always convince them to get it coming. So really, this comes down to is better communication with the people who send us our specimens, or having us find ways of getting the specimens to us in a much more efficient manner. So this is one place that we can really start working on, I think, soon, because this is going to have to take place first, otherwise we're going to be still having batches no matter what. Assuming that you can get that fixed or that you can start working on that, the other place you can look at this is grossing. And this is a matter of, you know, when you're in the gross room, you just can't sit on your cassettes. You can't sit on your specimens. I mean, there are many times when I was a resident where I noticed a tonsil that just hadn't been that came in at 9 a.m. that hadn't been touched till 2 or 3 p.m. There's no reason why that shouldn't have been grossed and out within 30 to 40 minutes, that kind of thing. And part of the problem is that we're an academic institution. We rely on residents to do a lot of the real work in the gross room. And in fact, we should be using small biopsy grossing techs, and the PA should be leveraged to start pushing that through. And you need to have ways of doing that. You need to have real-time monitoring. Now that we have barcoding in our place, we can start seeing how we can get real-time monitoring of which specimens came in and how long they've been sitting there. What's the aging report on our current number of specimens that we have in our place, and start pushing those things forward. And the other thing is that we shouldn't be waiting for nighttime processor runs. We should be picking these things up from the gross room at any given time. And luckily for me, this will be put into place where I get to send over my cassettes via tube from our new gross room that's going up in our new hospital 2.5 blocks away from our histology laboratory. So I will, by nature, by definition, will have to send over cassettes about 20 to 30 at a time all throughout the day with the tube station. So I can be able to test this in real time thanks to our wonderful hospital administrators. So barcoding tracking, I think Paul can't beat this to a dead horse, but you guys need to have this. If you don't have it, you should get it. Case distribution. This is the other thing that he started to allude to. Slides are no longer going to be delivered to a physical place. This is important for all of us. We all know that we rely on our slides coming to our office. If you have a reading room set up, which is usually a vast minority of you guys have a reading room set up, but if you have that, or your box, that we have boxes still that people have to check, you shouldn't have to wait for that. You're going to have that. It's all going to be digital. It's all going to come to your queue. So cases are going to be ready as soon as I finish scanning. So if you're scanning these things, pathologists don't need to review. They don't need a specific quantity of cases to start, okay? This is the whole graph that we had before. You don't have to wait until 10 o'clock for all your slides to come so you can start doing your work. If you have staggered batches, you can start doing them earlier. And in fact, if you have continuous flow, you can start doing it even earlier. So you can start having all your cases come and ready to go, and you can have a nice number of cases to start off when you get in by 8 o'clock because you already got these things produced. And again, assuming that we have like only a 12, 13-hour turnaround time throughout the day, you can have all your cases scanned and done. If you start your work by 1 or 2 in the morning in histology, you can have all your cases ready to go and be done through day's work by 4 or 5 with a continuous flow throughout the day. Now with continuous flow, there's going to be a lot of changes in our workflow and a lot of changes in the workflow of the pathologist. Sign-out is no longer going to be bashed, so continuous sign-out will be a very possible thing, which means we have to think about, do we go towards subspecialty reading rooms? Do we actually start thinking about having specific places where all of the subspecialty slides go to, or where the specialists go to sign out their cases, just like radiology has it? And do we have shift work? Do we have pathologists show up for different AM and PM shifts for their sign-out? That's something that we could do right now, is that we could start having them cover a service, and we don't start assigning. Right now, I think, how many of you guys assign cases to pathologists at accessioning? Probably just all of you, I think, are going to be doing that. Whereas you don't need to assign cases to pathologists. You assign them to a service, they just go to that service, and anybody picks up whichever case is coming. Again, if you have a way of triaging and know which cases are more important to read, which are the biopsies, whether the clinician did a rush, you can have all that in the system and see where you need to do it. Obviously, there's tons of benefits to this. You can have shorter turnaround time of the cases. You can have higher quality of patient care. And if you start thinking about image analysis, virtual consults, you can start pushing this farther and farther down the road. So just to summarize this, the vast majority of labs right now, I think, are nowhere ready for routine whole slide imaging. And full adoption really can only be realized after formal analysis and reconfiguration of our labs. I think right now, the $1 million or $2 million that I can save just by looking at changing my laboratory workflow and startup costs for whole slide imagers, I can put into my labs themselves. And then one final thought, I know we've talked a lot about here about the FDA decision, and not really decision, but the fact that the whole slide imaging is not approved yet by the FDA. While it's been a big item of discussion, I really see this as an opportunity for us. We have time now to really sort out all these issues so that by the time we do get prior diagnosis approved, we can now start doing this scanning in our institutions and have everything set up so all we have to do is flip the switch and we can just start. So I think that's kind of the goal that we're going for right now, is seeing how do we get this set up so we can keep on going down the road. And thank you. I think that's it. I finished with 1 minute to spare. So.
You got 1 minute. Okay.
Good.
Great job. So next here in this room is the award ceremony for the Spanish specialists and the post-split. So you wouldn't want to miss that. So, okay. Very good. Thank you.
What's yours called, Dr. Heller?
Mine's called President.
Oh, there it is.
President, yeah, there we go. So that's there.
It'll be open up. I'll just leave it open in the background.
Okay. There's a lifetime achievement.
Or I can just fire this up.